Purnamada, Purnamidam, Purnam, Purnamudachyate, Purnasya, Purnamadaya, Purnameva Vasishyate. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Om, that Brahman is infinite. This phenomenal world is also infinite. But this is only a projection of that. Nevertheless, if this is taken away, that remains infinite as before. Om, peace to the individuals, peace to the plants, and peace to the animals. And this is a peace chant. We just finished the Isha Upanishad before. I think we spent about a year on it, or more. But we're going to be going through the whole series of the Upanishads one after another. And so the next one we're going to do is the Isha Upanishad. The Isha Upanishad, as I had mentioned before, is one of the best places to start because it's got the best story and it's very systematically organized and it gives it in a very readable fashion. It gives you the knowledge. Most of the other Upanishads like this are more philosophical, more just getting to the actual knowledge and not so much story and things to go with it. So the Isha Upanishad is one of the shortest of the Upanishads. It has only 17 verses and is considered probably one of the oldest. So then the commentary, and this was a peace chant connected with the Isha Upanishad, and Swami Varadananda's commentary says that the idea is that the phenomenal world has no independent existence. It exists only because it is supported by Brahman. It is only a superimposition on Brahman. Sometimes, if we walk along a road in the dark, we might mistake a rope for a snake. This delusion is possible because of the rope. When this delusion goes, there is no longer a snake. It has merged into the rope. Similarly, when we know Brahman, which is also ourself, the world merges into it. So now in this peace chant, this Purnamada and Purnamidam, is the essence of the whole Vedanta. You know, with all the scriptures, if you had to boil it down to one statement, this is probably as good a summary as anything. And the idea is that everything, there's only one thing in existence, that's Brahman, that's God, or the ultimate reality. What we see as the world is a projection, a covering of that one existence, but yet behind it is Brahman, is that one reality. And the classic example they use is the snake and the rope. In the dark, a person sees a rope and he thinks it's a snake. And then he becomes very frightened and worried. And actually, when I was in India, in Vrindavan, there was a Canadian, they have a hospital there, and there's a Canadian doctor there that's talking to him. And he said, out in the villages and all, that people often get bit by cobras. And he said they have these serums and things that they can cure, but he said they have to reach the patient within about 45 minutes, otherwise, there's nothing they can do. And he said, quite by the time the people get them in from the village by ox cart and things, it's too late. So a person sees something. He thinks it's a snake, gets very frightened. And, but then he realizes it's only a rope. It's not a threat at all. There's no danger at all. So like that, we're in this world, we're seeing a world, and we're thinking it's a snake. We're thinking it's threatening, that there's all kinds of problems there. There's crimes, there's muggies, there's all kinds of things going on, and we get very frightened. Not realizing that all the time we're immortal divine beings and we're in the presence of the immortal divine being. So this world that we see, the phenomenal world, is like a movie that's being shown, being projected, and each of us have a particular part in that movie. We have a particular role to play in this world, and so we're playing our role, but if we think that what we experience as a world and in life is totally real, then it becomes very stressful and frightening and all kinds of difficulties are there. As soon though, as we begin to realize, oh, it's actually God there, it's actually God with me, that God is my real nature, then all the fear gradually leaves. And this is one of the first things that tends to happen as a person starts to get on the spiritual path, is he becomes fearless. You know, Swami Vivekananda said this is one of the signs of actual spiritual progress, is that a person becomes fearless. When you know that really I'm with God, I'm in God, I'm just seated in a theater, I'm just watching a movie. Yeah, and this is the key to understanding all of the Vedantic knowledge and all, is to realize that we're really just the spectators. All the time we're safe and sound, just sitting, watching a movie, and then it goes on. And like you go to a movie, the terrible things may happen in the movie. You know, nowadays cars blow up and people get shot and everything. And it's like terrible things are happening, but you enjoy it because you know, oh, I'm safe and sound here. It's just a movie. And then it becomes exciting and kind of enjoyable. But when you think it's real, and you think it's happening to you, then it becomes a frightening thing. So this is, the idea is that not that the world is bad, or anything in the world is actually bad, but that we're misperceiving it. Where we're seeing good and bad and evil and things going on, is actually the presence of God there. And so, you know, one of the great jnanis, great sages of modern times, of course, is Ramana Maharshi. And one time, somebody quoted to him a famous verse that says, I will give you all knowledge in half a verse. Brahman is real, the world is unreal. Now, Ramana Maharshi, who is known to be always in meditation, always absorbed, and always one of the great jnanis of modern times, he said, the world as world is unreal, but the world as God is real. And this is the thing, is not only do we discover that the world that threatens us and so forth is not actually real, but that underlying that is the presence of God Himself. And so this whole idea is expressed in this simple peace chant, that everything is God. Brahman is God, God is God, but also even the world that's projected, the universe that's projected, that's also God, because it's actually just taking place in the consciousness of God. So now we'll read, this is the introduction to the Isha Upanishad. This is which we'll be using the version by Swami Varadananda, which has very clear, good commentary. So it says the word Upanishad does not refer to a book. It refers to knowledge. But this knowledge is not ordinary knowledge. It is the knowledge of the highest order. That knowledge which gives you peace, happiness, and a sense of blessedness. In order to get that knowledge, you must go to a teacher who himself has that knowledge. If you are blind, you would not go to another blind man and ask him to lead you. In the same way, you would not go to a teacher who does not have the knowledge you are seeking. Then you must approach this teacher with great humility. He does not expect any money from you, but he does expect you to be humble and listen to him patiently. And he also expects that you will love and respect the truth that he will be teaching you. You must have great yearning for that truth, and you should approach the teacher after you have gone through the prescribed moral and spiritual disciplines. So the Isha Upanishad is so called because it starts with the word Isha. Isha means the Lord, who is the inmost self of all. So unlike other Upanishads, the Isha is all in verse, and many people think it is the oldest and best of the Upanishads. It is found in the Shukla Yajur Veda, and every Upanishad is connected with one of the Vedas. So this one is found in the Shukla Yajur Veda. Though it forms a part of the Samhita section, which normally deals with rituals, the Isha Upanishad concerns itself only with non-dualistic knowledge and has nothing to do with rituals. So as a rule, Upanishads bristle with disputes about knowledge and ignorance, the real and the unreal, and the one and the many. But the Isha Upanishad very succinctly resolves all these disputes. It shows how all that is relative finally dissolves into one absolute existence. This absolute is nameless and formless. In common usage, it is referred to as Brahman, the biggest, or the Paramatma, the cosmic self. This Brahman, or Paramatma, is the essence of our own being and underlies all that exists. In names and forms there is diversity, but in spirit there is only one. The nature of this one and our relationship with it is the subject of inquiry of this Upanishad. So this is the introduction by Swami Varadananda. Now in this translation of the Isha Upanishad by Swami Varadananda, it includes a rather long, scholarly kind of introduction, which may be a little dry and technical, but it gives a kind of a background for those who don't know much about the Vedas and so forth. So we'll go through that. Like I said, it's a little bit kind of dry, but anyway, we'll go through it, and it gives some perspective of where the Upanishads are coming from and what the Vedas are and so forth. So he says, what are the Vedas, of which the Upanishads constitute the end and aim, the very crest jewel? What is their source? What are their features? The great Sayanacharya, to whose elucidation the present understanding of the meaning is mainly due, defines the Veda as that literature which sheds light on the transcendental means of achieving what is wished for and avoiding what is disliked. The role of the revealed scripture lies beyond the spheres of perception and inference, for it illumines us about all the divinities, moral and spiritual duties of man, and absolute truth. Since man is imperfect, human deliverances, however exalted they may be, can hardly be accepted as final and infallible. Therefore, on questions regarding transcendental facts, self-manifest, inherently valid, eternally existing, divinely inspired Veda alone can be considered infallible and conclusively authoritative. The continuous unfoldment of the predominantly religious and spiritual culture of India for millennium, governing the thought and conduct of the race, working through the moral and religious impulses of the entire people, and drawing them ever to the realization of the highest values of life, attest to the greatness and penetrative influence of the Vedas. So the Vedas go back to time immemorial, and as Swami Vivekananda mentioned, the meaning Veda, the basic meaning of Veda is knowledge. And by Vedas, it's not just meant specific books, specific slokas or verses or things, but it's really meant that higher spiritual knowledge, which in ancient times the rishis, the sages of India discovered. They went into the forest, they meditated and so forth, searched within, and they uncovered this whole spiritual reality underlying the everyday material existence that we experience. And like that, saints and sages throughout the ages have discovered the same knowledge. And that is the kind of the foundation and the purpose of the Vedas is to communicate. So what we have as the Vedas, the scriptures, is coming out of the discoveries of these ancient sages in India. Now, one thing interesting is that the Vedas are the oldest scriptures known to man. and they're all written in Sanskrit, and showing that the earliest, the very earliest writings, teachings we have are the highest spiritual knowledge. And written in Sanskrit, the most sophisticated scientific language. In fact, they discovered that Sanskrit, study of Sanskrit is very helpful for computer programming because it's so scientific and systematic, whereas English and other languages are very kind of difficult. So, in other words, we don't know where these came from. For countless centuries, before they were written down, they were passed on by word of mouth. And even today, you know, some Indians have the name like Chaturvedi or Trivedi or so. They use that a Brahmin family would be responsible for one of the Vedas, either Rig Veda or Sama Veda or something, and they were supposed to memorize, you know, that whole entire Veda and then pass it on to the next generation. So like that, these truths were discovered by the ancient sages, they were taught to their disciples, and then they were passed on by memory, you know, from one generation to the next until much, much later in the process, things got written down. But it's just, the idea is we don't know. Our understanding of history goes back maximum maybe 10,000 BC, back to the first cities there were. After that, well, it's archaeology. You know, they discover some pots or some little shards of clay or something, but really what culture this came out of was like at a pinnacle of culture. These weren't primitive, you know, savages sitting around speaking Sanskrit. They were, you know, it was like the highest culture, and we don't really know where it all came from because it goes back into so ancient times and further back than we have any knowledge. So the Vedas are transmitted from beginningless antiquity through a continuous chain of teachers and pupils who, relying upon the statements in the Vedas themselves, consider them to be eternal in aparusha, in other words, having no human source. Of those who hold fast to this theory of eternality, some substantiate their position by arguing that since the Vedas are the only source of our knowledge of Dharma and Brahman, which are eternal, and since the relation between word and its meaning is also eternal, the Vedas are eternal in language and content. There are others who view the unworldly and spiritual principles enunciated in them to be eternal and timeless. They do not subscribe to the other part of the argument. In other words, the eternality of the language of the Veda, which they would assert is but a composition, vakya, of rishis or apta-purushas, reliable and selfless personages who have realized those truths for themselves. Now this, in other words, some people say that by the Vedas is meant this knowledge. You know, there's this transcendental knowledge, and that's eternal. Others say, but also by Vedas is meant the actual books themselves, what's written in the books. And now Swami Varadananda, he said that by the Vedas really it's referring to this transcendental knowledge, which is eternal, which is always true. But it doesn't mean a kind of a slavish dependence upon the words that were written down. These were just, you know, kind of snapshots of things that were gradually came down to us, and through many changes, many of the Upanishads, they were all lost over time. And so, in other words, it's like people who are fixed on the literal interpretation of the Bible. You know, every word in the Bible, well, this has got to be true. Then they become confined to that. Whereas Swami Vivekananda said, no, it's this eternal knowledge, which can only be known ultimately by having it revealed from within your own consciousness. And it's kind of without limit, without, you know, confining, without being narrowed down to just what's written in particular books, but it's like an open thing. And all these different sages, they explored themselves, they discovered themselves, and then what they discovered, they reported to their disciples. So according to the famous Purusha Sutta, the Rig, Yasur, Shinsama, were generated at the beginning of creation from a mental sacrifice of adoration performed by the divine Prajapatis and sages, with the Supreme Being as the material of the offering. The Svetasvatara Upanishad states that the Supreme Being creates Brahma, the Creator, and communicates to him the Vedas. The Brihadaranyaka Upanishad says that as from a fire kindled smoke issues, even so the Rig Veda, etc., are all the breath of this infinite reality. The Brahma Sutra declares that Brahman is the source of the Vedas, and of the same book, and the same book affirms them to be eternal. The Mimamsa Sutta establishes the eternality of the word. The first stanza of the Srimad Bhagavata, voicing the view of the Puranas in general, states that God, the Supreme Truth, calls the Vedas to appear in the mind of Brahma, the first poet. Smritis generally state that the eternally existing Vedas were remembered by the Creator at the beginning of the cycle of creation, and were transmitted to the world through a chain of successors of teachers and learners. Sri Shankara, in his introduction to the Gita Bhashya, speaks of the imparting of the religion of works and the religion of renunciation, constituting the contents of the Vedas, to Prajapatis like Marichi and to sages like Sanaka, by the Lord Narayana, immediately after the creation of the universe, and also of the subsequent dissemination of the Vedic lore through that channel. So Shankara divides the Vedas into two parts, known as the Karma Kanda and the Jnana Kanda. The work portion and the knowledge portion. Now in the work portion, this refers to the Vedas themselves. So it's called the Rig Veda, Sama Veda, Yajur Veda, the Tharva Veda. These are the actual mantras and things and instructions that were used in performing the ancient worship, the yajnas. And they were the prayers and the hymns and things that were chanted by different priests during the worship, and they also included instructions about how to properly perform the worship. Now the purpose of the yajnas was to acquire merit and to basically acquire good things, acquire heaven afterwards, acquire long life, protection from disease, things like that. I sometimes think it's almost like the science and technology of their day. Man found themselves surrounded by all kinds of forces. A drought could come and ruin your crops. Cattle could get a disease, and your cattle could die. Like that. Well, on all sides they were faced by forces that they couldn't control, and so the ancient yajnas were kind of a way of appeasing the underlying powers that behind these things, and so that to bring good results. So behind the yajnas, behind the worships, was generally some purpose, some desire that you wanted to get, maybe going to heaven or long life and things like that. Now, along with the Karma Kanda, the Vedas themselves, mantras and so on, there was the Jnana Kanda. And this especially is what you find in the Upanishads. The Upanishads especially form the Jnana Kanda, or the knowledge portion. In this, you get the underlying truths and knowledge, spiritual truths that underlie all the performance of the rituals and everything else. In other words, the rituals, they help you get through life, they may bring you blessings and good things in your life, but the knowledge, the Jnana portion, Jnana Kanda, it gives you the knowledge of what's the actual reality of things. And the essential message of all the Upanishads is simply what we had in the peace chant, Purnamidam, that underlying the world that we're in, that we experience, underlying that is the one universal reality, the one infinite, glorious, eternal reality. And that reality, that Brahman, is our real self. It's who we are. And as long as we think, I'm this person, I'm this individual, then we're struggling, trying to make good things happen to this particular person. And this goes on even after we leave the body. We go to heaven realm and other experiences. But we want to try to bring good experiences within our own personal life. But in the Jnana Kanda, the knowledge portion, there's the knowledge that everything, the source of this entire universe, is there within you. And once you find that, then you found everything. And in other words, in human life, we think, oh, it's a good thing to make $1 million. Or now you have to become a billionaire to be important. But some people struggle in trying to get, raise $1 billion. When you begin to get even the slightest little bit of a sense of who you are, then who cares? I don't need $1 billion. I have everything. And this is ultimately kind of the principle behind renunciation. He said, we're always looking outside ourselves from our personal standpoint and thinking, oh, I need this, and I want to get this, and I need to have that, otherwise I won't be happy. But when you know the truth, then you discover everything, this entire universe, God in all His love and glory and wisdom is here within me. Once you touch that, once you understand that I'm totally loved and protected by God, then you don't care. It's like a person who's got $1 million, he doesn't care about a dime. Although most of them do, because they got their $1 million by being greedy. But anyway, and this is the idea. He said, as long as we're clinging to our limited, small kind of personal existence, as long as we're always worried about what am I going to get, how can I be happy, how can I find this, then we're always kind of searching, roaming through the world and leading a very small kind of existence. But when you get to the knowledge, and that knowledge can only come from within, as a revelation from within consciousness. It's not something you can get out of the books or things ultimately. And when you get that knowledge, then you realize that, oh, this is it. There's nothing more. If I'm the whole universe, if I have, why do I worry about what happens a little bit here and there? So this is, like I said, chakra, and this also Swami Vivekananda emphasized. Again, he focuses not on the ritualism so much as the underlying knowledge of it. That's important. And so he used to say that the difference between Karma Kanda and Jnana Kanda. So when we refer to the Vedas, when you refer to the Vedas as the basis of Hinduism as the most kind of socialized, is really referring to the Jnana Kanda, to the knowledge portion more than just specific rituals. But nowadays, not many people actually do Vedic rituals anymore. Now, some priests do, and it's kind of a hybrid kind of Vedic thing. But the essential thing, the thing that's eternal, is really the knowledge. So these various accounts given in the authoritative books of the past speak for the inspirational quality of the Vedas and the great veneration with which they were looked upon from the dawn of Hindu civilization. So even though the orthodox teachers of India do not assent to the dialectic differences and chronological strata recognized by Western scholars in the body of the Vedas, they have their own logical appellations, divisions, and classifications of the various parts of the Vedic literature. So just as in Christianity, you have what they call the higher criticism, where scholars begin to look at the Bible from a very just purely scholarly standpoint, and same with Western scholars have tended to look at the Vedas, and they do it from a very dry kind of a scholarly historical approach. Whereas for those people who believe in the Vedas, who are inspired by the Vedas, all those kind of details, they don't matter so much as what the knowledge is. So, but in the Indian scholars, so they have their own kind of analysis of things. So the Veda is generally spoken of as a vidya, from the root vid, meaning to know, reflect, possess, be, denoting wisdom that is gained by intuition or instruction. When taken as a vidya, the Veda has two phases, the higher one and a lower one, para and apara. The one connoting the divine wisdom, and the other knowledge of everything else that tends to it. Shastra, or scripture, is from the root shish, meaning, or shash, meaning to wish, command, or teach. And hence the Veda as a shastra is either ajnata, Nyapaka, or apavita pravartaka. That is revelational or mandatory. The Vedas are also known commonly as Nigama, Shruti, and Annaya. Nigama implies a settled text handed down from the beginningless antiquity. Shruti denotes a revealed text, heard by the pupil from the teacher. Annaya is what is learned by repetition and reflection. Almost synonymous with apara and paravidya is the division into karmakanda and jnanakanda, the work section and the knowledge section. The former dealing with religious rites and duties, and the latter with God, soul, and nature. It is generally held that this twofold division coincides with the external division into non-Upanishadic and Upanishadic Vedic literature. Such a view cannot be taken as well-marked and precise, since there is ritualistic material interspersed in certain portions of some of the Upanishads, and esoteric and philosophical ideas in the Samhitas. So, Muktiko Upanishad recognizes that, like oil in the sesamum seed, Vedanta is established essentially in every part of the Veda. We are therefore to take these names and divisions more as dominated by the spirit and purposes that govern them, rather than as a mere formal or structural matter. So again, knowledge is divided up into Paravidya, supreme knowledge, and Aparavidya, the not supreme knowledge. Now, under Aparavidya comes all of science, all of scholarship, all the things you learn in college, including study of Sanskrit, study of the scriptures. A person who knows the scriptures very well is called a pundit, it's called a scholar. So it's intellectual knowledge. Any kind of knowledge about the universe, how it operates, science, and all these things, technology, all these things are considered aparavidya. You're looking out and you're analyzing the world and knowledge and so forth. And the Vedas too, part of them, they were, a lot of them were involved in knowledge about kind of the subtle laws of nature. That would take a person to heaven or so forth. But all this is a secondary knowledge. Now the Paravidya, supreme knowledge, this is the knowledge of Brahman. This is the knowledge of the underlying truth and reality of the universe. And it actually only comes by revelation from within yourself. You know, you can study books on Vedanta, you can study Upanishad and so forth, but you won't really have Paravidya until you begin to experience God within yourself. And then that begins to open up a whole new type of knowledge. You know, it's through books, through studying someone, you get a concept about God. You get ideas in your mind. Oh, this is what God is like. And somehow it gives you an understanding. But to actually know what God is, you have to experience it. And this is the Paravidya, the supreme knowledge. And that comes only through kind of going deep within yourself and gradually uncovering this knowledge. You know, the idea is also Vivekananda is that all of knowledge is within us, but we have to bring it out. And this is the very meaning of education. Educare, from the Latin, it means to bring out, to draw out. And this was the Socratic method. If you remember that, he would begin asking his students questions. And gradually the knowledge would come from within themselves. And this is the only way that you will actually ever get beyond the Paravidya, is that when it begins to unfold from within yourself. It's there already. It's always there. It's never lost, but you have to kind of bring it to the surface of your experience. Then it becomes a living knowledge. Now, you can be a scholar, a great scholar, and it doesn't matter what kind of person you are. You know, so you can be a great chemist and still be a really crummy person, just a thief, egoistic, selfish, everything. It doesn't matter, because it's just book learning. But to have spiritual knowledge, you have to be spiritual. And you have to that knowledge, in other words, that knowledge transforms you. It's not just something that you carry around in your head and talk about. It's something that changes you as it begins to come and gradually transforms you into a wonderful spiritual being, that you realize that you're actually the child of God. You're a glorious, every single person is a glorious spiritual being, but it's covered over. And when you uncover it, then it begins to come up and it transforms you. And this is the obstacle to spiritual knowledge. Most people don't want to be transformed. We want to be what we are, but have more money, more pleasure, more happiness, and more peace and all this, but we really don't want to be kind of transformed. But this is what spiritual knowledge, part of it, means. There's a transformation of consciousness that completely changes you into something else, and something divine. As Swami Vivekananda said, all souls are potentially divine, and the whole purpose is to manifest that divinity, to actually realize it, to experience it. So the word, so the Vedas and their connected Upanishadic knowledge, these are called Shruti, meaning that which is heard, that which is kind of revealed. There are other scriptures called Smriti, which means that which is remembered. Things like the laws of Manu and other scriptures. Shruti represents revelation, and it represents eternal truth. On the other hand, the Smriti, the secondary scriptures, they represent truth that applies to a particular time and place. They're appropriate for the culture and the time in which they were written, but they may not apply to modern times. For example, if you go to the laws of Manu, which are way back in the Middle Ages, most of that, like how you carry your firewood and things like this, they just don't apply in modern society. And so, there are some things you find in Scripture which are eternal, which apply to everybody, which are always true. And this is ultimately the Paravidya, the supreme knowledge. There are other things that are appropriate at particular times and places and so forth, and then they can change later on. So this leads, this division, basically into the Upanishadic and the non-Upanishadic way of knowledge, and this division into the Karma Kanda, the ritual portion, and the knowledge portion. This leads us to the customary classification based upon the form, purport, and style of the Vedic literature. There are 4 well-known divisions of the Vedas into the Rit, Yajus, Sama, and Atharva, and then Mantra or Samhita, Brahmana, Aranyaka, and Upanishad, and Charana Shaka or Veda. Of the first division, the words are Rik. means a laudatory verse. Yajus, a liturgical passage or formula, mostly prose and sometimes metrical. In Sama, a melody. These three species of compositions, in their collective form, were also called, in a secondary sense, the Rig, Yajus, and Sama Samhitas. Finally, by extension, the Brahmanas, annexed to these three, Rig, Yajus, and Sama, and the Atharva Samhitas, the Aranyakas, supplementary to them, and the Upanishads, either embedded in, terminated by, or affiliated to each of them, were also included by the name of the respective Veda to which they belong. In other words, each of these Upanishads, they were connected, considered part of a particular Veda. Like this was the Shukla Yajur Veda, is where the Isha Upanishad comes from. So the self-manifest Veda, which according to the Puranic account, was a unified plenary revelation made to Brahma in the beginning, suffered much obscurity in subsequent ages due to the confusion and want of care on the part of the learners. At the commencement of the Dvapara Yuga, therefore, the great sage Krishna Dvaipayana or Vyasa resuscitated it by clarifying and facilitating its study by his methodical arrangement in the four divisions, Rig, Yajur, Sama, and Atharva, and by making his four disciples, Pela, Vaishnampayana, Jaimini, and Sumantu, the recipients and transmitters of the four Vedas in the respective order. Disciples of these lineal heads, in course of time, multiplied and formed into groups, separating from each other and giving rise to various sakhas or branches. Each of these sakhas had its own reduction or collection of the given Veda preserved as its heirloom, differing not a little from the other. These were named according to the shaka or school to which it belonged, as Katha, Katuma, Vajashraneya, Madhyandina, and the like. The Muktika records as there having existed 21 such shakas for the Rig Veda, 94 for the Black Yajur Veda, 15 for the White Yajur Veda, 1,000 for the Sama Veda, and 50 for the Atharva Veda. About most of these we know nothing at present except this bare mention. So as I said, all of this Vedic knowledge, it was originally transmitted orally. Over centuries, it was transmitted orally from a teacher, a particular guru, to his followers, and many of these, they formed different schools so about these different Vedic traditions. And I say, now I'm not sure, is this the same? No, it's not quite the same as the Gotra, I don't think. But it's, anyway, so there was a lot of these different schools, these different traditions that passed this knowledge on from generation to generation to generation. Until finally, in a much, much later time, they were all kind of written down and eventually became sort of what we have now. But as we see, much of this Vedic knowledge and literature, it was lost over time. Actually, what we have is like just a little tiny bit of what was there at one time. And it's interesting to think what type of culture was there, and we don't know anything hardly about that culture because it's so far back in history that we simply don't have any information about it. So one division was into the four Vedas, this one. The next division, partly based on style and partly on purport, is the one into mantra and Brahmana. The Kalpa Shastra defines the Veda as constituting of mantra and Brahmana. This division is internal to the above said fourfold division into the four Vedas. For each Veda has its mantra and Brahmana portions. The former comprising all the chants and invocations, in other words mantras, and the latter everything else with the exception of the mantras. So again, we mentioned that the Vedas themselves were primarily the mantras, and there were like different priests that would be involved in the yajna, the ancient worship. And so one priest would chant the mantras, and one would sing hymns from the Sama Veda, and one would recite things from the Yajna Veda. And along with those, there were various explanations about how to pronounce it and what in that, and things like that, which were called the Brahmanas. The Brahmanas, they were like a commentary on the mantras that were used. So the first three samhitas, by which we are to understand the three canonical texts described as the Rig, Yajus, and Sama, collections embodying the invocatory stanzas and the ritualistic formulas sung or uttered, arranged in hymns, books, and other literary divisions, had even a functional basis. The popular Viniyoga, or use of the Veda, was for the meticulous performance of painstaking and complicated sacrificial ceremonials, which were believed to bring about directly or indirectly abhyudaya or nishreyasa, temporal prosperity, and the highest good of life. And so all parts of the Veda had to be interpreted in such a way as they might find place in this scheme either as invocatory, eulogistic, or directive in their application. So the four Vedas thus came to be associated with the four priests who were indispensable to the performance of a sacrifice or a yajna. They are the holder, the reciter of the solemn hymns, Advaryu, are the performer of the material part of the sacrifice with the help of liturgical formulas, the Ugatra are the chanter of the solemn songs, and a Brahman, who, although by name is associated with the Atharva Veda, is the superintendent of the entire sacrifice. The very embodiment of the sacrificial art and the Vedic lore in general, so as to be able to advise the other priests, and rectify any mistake committed during the performance. So this is, we see these different original Vedas, the four Vedas, were connected with different priests who were involved in performing the ancient worships. And the Atharva Vedas, there was like one head priest who was kind of a supervisor over everything, making sure that it was all done right. Now one thing about the yajnas, the ancient Vedic rituals, is that they had to be done right. The fire, the wood and things that was laid out, everything had to be done kind of precisely in a particular way, because otherwise it wouldn't work. Like I said, this was almost like the science and technology. They were dealing with kind of subtle laws of the nature, but they tried to achieve specific results through the worship, and so it had to be performed exactly right. You remember the story of Nachiketa in the Katha Upanishad, how Yama taught him the fire sacrifice, taught him how to arrange the bricks and the wood and everything, and all the technical things, because if it wasn't performed right, and this is in the, they say if the Sanskrit, if the mantras are not pronounced correctly, it doesn't work. Because it's kind of connecting with subtle forces or energies there, and so if it's not done right, we won't get the right result. So you had the different priests involved, each with a different Veda, and then you had like a head priest who was sort of supervising, making sure everything got done correctly. Whereas on the other hand, see, this is the attitude in the yajnas and all. But the other attitude towards worship is you do it out of devotion. You do it out of love, and then if you make mistakes in the ritual and all, that's unimportant so much as the love, the devotion, the surrender that you do it with. And this is what they call sattvic worship. So among, let's see. Okay, well, among the Samhitas, or collection, the Rig Veda is by far the most important. For a considerable portion of the other Vedas are either repeated or adapted from it. According to the current Sakala school, it has 1,023 metrical hymns sung in praise of various devatas or aspects of the divine. These hymns of varying length, the longest having 52 stanzas, are arranged into 10 mandalas or books, of which the 10th is especially interesting for the philosophical and esoteric material contained therein, although such information is not entirely absent from the other parts too. To the Rig Veda belong Aitareya, Kaushitaki, Pangi, and Sankhya Yayana Brahmanas. The Aitareya and Kaushitaki's Aranyakas supplement the Brahmanas of the same names. The Aitareya and Kaushitaki Upanishads are taken in as some of the concluding sections of the Aranyakas bearing those names. So the Rig Veda is kind of the fundamental, the basic Veda, and I said the other Vedas, it's often a lot of the verses there are actually taken out of the Rig Veda and then sung or recited in different ways. So let me see, we'll stop here then. Like I said, this commentary is from, like I said, kind of scholarly, you might find a little dry, but it's giving some good background information. Things which I was, helps put into perspective what we were trying to teach. Okay, so any questions? Okay, so anyway, welcome back. We're everything started up again now. So on Tuesday, Swami Varadananda, he started his class again on the Gospel of Shama Krishna. And he's also started, returned to the Sunday classes on meditation according to the Yoga Aphorisms of Patanjali. Om Asatoma Satyamaya Tamasoma Jyotirgamaya Vichvarma Amritam Gavaya Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. O Lord, lead us from the unreal to the real. Lead us from darkness to light. And lead us from death to immortality. For peace.